My name is Curtis Garten. I'm the Visual Analytics Product Manager at Oculus. What I wanted to do was just give you guys a brief overview of some different ways of looking at communication data for the purposes of analysis. So the first thing that we would have to obviously define is what are the goals of doing communication analysis. Some of the things that we look for are the ability to look at social hierarchies, looking at the structure of groups. We want to look for identifying different parties of interest. Perhaps it's parties that are known to us, unknowns. Looking at pre and post-event activities, so to look at what kind of communication happens before an event and what kind of communication happens after an event, which can definitely reveal some insight into activities that have taken place. And then finally, identify locations of interest. So looking at different locations and how that affects the communication that happens at these locations. Different types of communication. So we've got kind of three major types of communication that we can look at. Asynchronous messaging, which is really an A to B type communication. Things like SMS, emails, tweets, anything where you don't have to have an active channel or an active communication link that's happening. The second one is synchronous or bidirectional communication, where you do have to have some type of active and ongoing communication. So this would be things like a telephone call, Skype messaging, Skype voice over IP, video conferencing, anything where you have A to B that's active and ongoing. The third type is really one-to-many. It's a broadcast type messaging. And so this would be things like radio, blogs, news stories, public Twitter messages, anything that's from one source but goes out to pretty much anyone. There's no real way for us to determine who received the message, but we definitely can pinpoint the broadcaster of that message. Different data types that are generated from communication data. So call records, things like email transaction logs, social networking messages generate a lot of data. Definitely, network traffic logs is another one that's starting to be more and more used. Radio communication logs, and one of the most basic ones, transcripts of communications. So all these different types of data are generated by communications and are available for us to look at and for analysis. If we really wanted to dig into those and look at the anatomy of these different types of communication events, what we would see is something like this. If we really break it down, we've got our source of the message, of the communication, and we've got a receiver. We typically have information about the location, whether that's a physical location, geospatial location, like an address or a coordinate, or it could be a network address or just simply a Twitter handle. Then we also have the receiver location, and again that could be either geospatial or network-based. And then we've got the times of these messages. So when we're talking about asynchronous messaging, it's typically a send time when the message was sent. If you're looking at bidirectional communication, then you're going to be looking at a start and an end time. So when did the Skype call start and when did the Skype call end? At the bottom there, we have three different examples of these types of data. So looking at how the data is represented there. For the scope of this overview, we're just going to look at simple communications, which is really a message or a call that's been placed from a source to a destination, and it's either going to be a geospatial or network-centric address there. So there's going to be a couple different patterns that we're going to be looking at as part of this communication analysis overview. We're going to look at frequency of communication events, we're going to look at locations, we're going to look at times, and then some of the different event behaviors that can happen before and after activities, and then looking at social network logs for determining the hierarchy of a network. So the first one is really call frequency. And so this is an interesting one where we look at the frequency of calls that are made to and from one party. So in this case, what we're looking at in the top right-hand corner there is a chart that shows us the top 3 contacts that have been communicating with an individual. And so the top 3 there, you can see that those contacts have either been in contact or contacted by one individual more than anyone else. And so by being able to kind of call that out or to highlight that can help us in understanding what type of communication events took place. Other things of interest to look at are going to be activity bursts and call sequences. So down at the bottom left hand there, you see we've highlighted some activity bursts that have taken place. So this is very interesting to be able to find these bursts of activity, because they typically indicate pre or post type communications. So that would be communications that happen before an event or activity, and help us to determine who was communicated with before or after an activity that we're interested in. In this case, we can take a look at the coloring of those communication events to determine who they were communicating with. So is it one of the top 3 contacts, or is it one of the less contacted individuals there? Here we have a breakdown of just five communication events from the top to the bottom there, and what we can do with that is to determine who they're communicating with based on call frequency. And so call frequency is going to be interesting. You can see number 1 there. That was a call that was made to one of the top 3 contacts, and so this could be someone like a close friend, manager, boss, or handler. The second one there is also to a very highly contacted, top 3 contact there. So this could be, girlfriend or family member as well. Later on, you can see that there's calls 3 and 4 happen to the call or contacts that are less contacted, and so this could be new individuals that have been met along the way, or new contacts that have been added, or perhaps contacts that are only contacted in different geographical areas. So we'll look at the influence of location as well in that. When we're looking at locations, so locations are a very interesting one for where the communication took place. Now, like I said before, this could be a geospatial, so a place on a map, or it could be network-centric, so looking at what address or IP or handle that it came from. So in this case, we can look at different parties that have been contacted at different locations, the frequency that changes at these different locations. So in this example here, these 3 calls are made to mainly new contacts, so people that are not contacted very frequently from that location. When they get to the second location, they start getting in contact with some of the top 3 callers. So what this could indicate is that in the first location, that our target there is actually with the top 3 callers, so there's no need for them to communicate with them. Once he's moved to the second location, then he's no longer in contact with them physically, so that he's now communicating with them via these communication events. So location can be a very interesting dimension to bring into this, which shows us different call patterns that happen from different locations. Call times, pretty straightforward. If we break down call times here, we can start to see resting hour periods as well as peak activity periods. And this is very interesting when you want to look at life cycle patterns to see when an individual has his typical resting hours and then his typical active hours. Sorry, just go back there. We can see, if you break this down on a week-to-week basis, we can see that's fairly routine, the kind of breaks in communication that happen there, so we can pretty much determine the resting hours, and what's the goal of this is to really determine when there are exceptions to that. When the pattern's broken, then we can spot exceptions to that. So social networks, here's some data that was collected from Twitter. All these messages were using a similar hashtag, and what's interesting about this is if we look at the breakdown on the left-hand side there, the network view, we can see that there are a number of kind of key users there that are kind of core and central to the messaging there. What I found was interesting was this kind of pre and post activity message burst. So you can see that before something happened, there was a spike in messages. It came down during an activity, and then it went back up post activity. So it would be very interesting to determine what that activity was and what type of messaging occurred around that activity. just to wrap up, time, location, and connections play a really important role. I think these are really important dimensions that need to be factored in when you're doing communication analysis work. The main theme here is really to look for these types of patterns, to be able to determine the patterns, and then to be able to find the exceptions to those patterns. So that's it from me for a brief overview of communication analysis.